When I was 22 years old, I got my first quote unquote real job. I had worked many summers as a lifeguard or counselor or different things like that prior, but I was hired as a research assistant at the Kennedy School of Government at an institute that studied smoking behavior and policy. And I was fortunate enough to have two bosses, both of whom turned out to be amazing in different ways. But one of them, I'll call Naomi, was a very hardworking research doctor who studied smoking behavior and cessation and things like that. And my other boss was a social scientist who did the same thing. So, about 6 months into the job, I was called into my boss's office to have a performance review. And I was so naive, I didn't really even know what performance reviews were. Obviously, I understood the word performance review. And she gave me this piece of paper. We worked on pieces of paper back then with different elements of the performance review and started walking through it with me. And I was able to conquer my indignation that like nobody had told me I was going to have a performance review and I didn't even know the criteria and I wish they'd told me at the beginning cuz I could have known what they were looking for. But anyway, I sort of swallowed that and listened carefully and I thought she had lots of fair points until she came to the point where she said she felt like I really spun my wheels too much and worked by myself and tried to solve problems. And she felt like I was really wasting time and I should have come and asked her sooner because she could have set me on the right track. Well, that did not land well on me. But again, I didn't say anything right away. And I went home and I thought about it and I slept on it and I made an appointment to talk to her a couple days later. And I came in and I said, "Hey, listen, I really wanted to talk about the wheel spinning comment. I felt like that was extremely unfair because every time I come to your office and I knock on the door, first of all, your door's always closed. And then you open the door and you look at me with a somewhat frowny face and say, 'What?' Which I interpreted to mean that you don't want to be interrupted. And so based on that information, I try not to interrupt you and I try to figure things out myself and work on my own." To my shock, she kind of leaned back in her chair and tears started rolling down her cheeks. And she said, "Oh my gosh, I work so hard and my time is so pressured and I hate interruptions because I'm trying to get things written. But I realize, of course, if you need to know something, then I need to welcome you to my office so you can ask questions." From that, we were able to work out a new way to allow me to come and talk to her when I had questions and such that it didn't interrupt her all the time, but also so that I wasn't feeling scared and cowed. And this small experience of standing up for myself, but really it felt so vulnerable to me. I was like definitely the lowest person in the hierarchy of the office to come and talk to this esteemed doctor. Taught me such an amazing lesson about the transformative quality of being transparent about your experience and what was happening for you. And so this episode today really tries to draw on that. And what we're going to be talking about is how to be transparent about what you're thinking or what you're feeling and using that as a catalyst to both deepen connection in conversations or teams, but also to get on a better work track. This is the Center for Medical Simulations podcast, Curious Now, and I'm Jenny Rudolph. Welcome back.
What if building leadership and connection skills in real life was less about grand epiphanies and more about small, consistent reps? The way athletes train, the way musicians practice, the way simulation refines teaming and clinical performance. Push ups, sit ups, building up your cardio. We put challenges and weights in front of ourselves to get fit. We embrace no pain, no gain. Yet when we find something difficult in real life, especially an interpersonal something, we often skitter away. We put down the weight and walk away from the workout. Curious Now helps us lean into those everyday interactions, the awkward silences, simmering tensions, and high stakes conversations, and treat them like reps in a leadership gym. Curious Now, stronger later.
Last week, we talked about trying to think about what I might be missing in someone else's understanding or what I might be missing about someone else's perspective. This week, we're going to be shifting the focus to how do I move from what looks like or might feel like to me the safer ground of unilateral control of a conversation or attempting to control it unilaterally to collaborative inquiry. And what is the role of sharing your thinking, narrating your thinking, sharing or disclosing your fears or emotions in those situations? I'm going to start by drawing on the work of Chris Argyris and my mentor and his student, Bill Torbert, and try to link that to this question of transparency. So, Chris Argyris was a business school professor at the Harvard Business School. And for many, many years, decades, he studied how do we have productive conversations and basically how do we fool ourselves about the quality of conversations we're having and the quality of leadership we might be exerting in a duet or a team or an organization. And studying these processes, he found something really interesting, which he called Model One. And my mentor, Bill Torbert, had a more evocative and colorful name for it, which was Mystery Mastery. And in Model One or Mystery Mastery, what we try to do is keep our goals hidden while attempting to unilaterally control the outside outcome. And we do that by acting rational, suppressing negative emotions, seeking to win and not lose, and trying to manage the control of the situation such that things go the way we have decided from the beginning they should go. What Chris Argyris noticed is many leaders and managers use this Model One or Mystery Mastery approach to their peril, in that it almost always eventually backfires. And what he found was in a smaller number of leaders and managers, and Bill Torbert found the same, there was an alternate approach, which came to be called Model 2, or in Bill Torbert's vocabulary, collaborative inquiry. And in that approach, we make our reasoning public, we share our goals, we invite input, and we test our own beliefs by putting them out there and asking other people for their input or critique of them. Put another way, in collaborative inquiry, not only are we being vulnerable, but we are treating our thought processes more like hypotheses rather than the truth. So this harks back to an earlier episode where we talked about, have your judgments or they'll have you. In this case, we're thinking about my thoughts are a filter on reality. They are a hypothesis about how things are going to go, and I need to test that hypothesis. So why do we do all this? Well, I think most of us want smooth interactions. We want calm relations with each other. We hate conflict. We run away from conflict. At least I certainly want to. And I've, had to train myself so much over the years to tolerate it. And I still struggle mightily. But the allure of the mystery mastery approach, where I keep my own goals and concerns and feelings a mystery while unilaterally trying to master the situation that might include you, is that when you let go of unilateral control, all of a sudden you step into this magical, if messy world of interdependence and hearing, and I'm going to use the metaphor of dancing with the other person's interests and needs. You're going to have the illusion of control versus the reality of collaboration. So, the reason I'm using the phrase the illusion of unilateral control is that when we don't give space for other people's perspectives or points of view, they often will grudgingly comply, but only do the minimum necessary to be seen to not disobey. They may lie and hide what they're actually doing, or they may pretend to agree when they don't really do so. And so you may think you're exerting control, but ultimately, in a certain way, it will slip away. A really important thing that people worry about in moving toward mutuality or toward collaborative inquiry and sharing what they're thinking, sharing what their goals are, is that they're going to be surrendering too much control. And that is a very legitimate concern. And so, just as when we express empathy for somebody else's feelings, it doesn't mean we agree with their assessment of the situation. Similarly, when we make space for other people's perspectives or goals or roles, depending on our responsibilities and our level of formal power, we still may have to make decisions that don't agree with or require losses on the other side. It's not always a win win situation. But by strategically collaborating, we can expand the pie in negotiation terms and have more options. So, let me give an example here of a meeting that I was in recently. And I got really upset about something that I perceived to be infringing on the autonomy of me and my team. And infringements on autonomy is something I don't do very well with. So it got pretty hot under the collar, and I spoke in a loud voice and I said, that person doesn't get to tell us how to do XYZ. And one of my colleagues, kindly basically took a different point of view and was kind of trying to put me straight and say, yeah, they may not be able to exactly tell us, but they're going to make the decision about what resources we get or don't get. And I really, continued to fight this and speak in an angry voice. Anyway, about 5 minutes later, I realized my contribution to the conversation was adding a lot more heat than light. And so I just, asked my colleagues in the meeting, could we just pause for a second? And I just wanted to acknowledge that I was really triggered and I was sorry. And I understood that I wasn't really helping right now. And I might not be able to help right now, but I would come back to them later and let them know how I could contribute to a better way forward. But the habit of acknowledging that when you're triggered is part of building this culture of transparency. What is the lesson from situations like that where you acknowledge that you're triggered, or the story I started with my first boss, where I shared with her that I thought something was really unfair, and I felt super vulnerable and at risk to do it as a, you know, first time employee at this organization. There's a paradox here, which is we tend to think that when we are going to be transparent about what we are thinking or feeling, it's going to make things worse. And it often makes things better. And in our formal teaching here at the Center for Medical Simulation, where we're helping healthcare leaders, managers, educators, simulation leaders learn to be transparent about what they are seeing their colleagues or trainees do, getting over the hurdle of not believing that this is going to make it better is something that we have to constantly test empirically. And I'm using that researchy language to connect back to the idea of treating our own beliefs as a hypothesis. So I think one of the hardest things for us in starting the practice of being transparent is seeing whether it's really going to help. So one pitfall is sometimes people think, "Oh, I'm going to be transparent." You're really a jerk. Were you born that way? Is a form of being transparent. When we say transparent, we're talking about transparent about what I'm feeling or what my goals are, not my attributions about you. And so, how do we build the muscle of testing whether this transparency is really going to help? And I was fortunate to have an early success at the very beginning of my career, which basically seeded this idea that I could do it and it was valuable. But for those of you who, like me, are often fearful to do it still, I love the idea of Bob Keegan's safe, modest test. So, Robert Keegan has a book called The Way We Talk Can Change the Way We Work. And he also talks about when we're stuck and having difficulty changing. He says, take the hypothesis that you are holding as truth and try to do a little safe, modest test. And so, in this case, it would be the thing we're going to offer to you as the workout of the week, which is come up with a thought or a concern or a feeling that you could bring to a conversation that you might not normally, that might feel risky, that you could test whether that's actually going to work or not. So, our workout of the week is actually the first step there, which is simply coming up with an idea, a goal, a vulnerable feeling, a fear that you might be able to have as an honest disclosure that might change the dynamic of an interaction. So, stated again, what small, honest disclosure might change the dynamic of an interaction? So, just come up with that. And if you're inclined, we recommend doing a scene assessment like you would if you were a paramedic before you step into the scene, make sure it's safe for you. What's happening around me that makes me feel like I can or I can't share this honestly? And then if I decide I might be a little afraid, but I think it's worth a safe, modest test, then you could try that little disclosure. The thing I'm most afraid of, if I bring up this topic, is X. Or in my example, it feels so unfair that you're telling me I'm spinning my wheels because I see you doing this and I feel stuck. We're hoping that with this exercise, you'll begin to see how transparency, that's the word we're using for sharing your thinking, not only demystifies your intentions, but also opens up the space for richer, more mutual collaborations. We'd like to end with this thought, which is I don't know about you, but transparency often feels like a leap of faith. Is this going to land okay? Am I going to be safe doing this? When I was 21 years old, I came out as a lesbian, and that was certainly a huge leap of faith. I was worried the whole entire world was going to come crashing down around me. So your leap of faith does not have to be that big. It could be a small, modest test. But especially in environments steeped in unilateral control and hidden agendas, this can feel a bit edgy. However, as you practice sharing your goals openly, what you do is you set the stage for a culture of mutual trust and respect. So you're starting to be that engine of culture change by modeling. And this shift from mystery mastery to collaborative inquiry is not only about giving up control, it's really about creating a space where true mutual influence and creativity can take root.